Welcome to Module 2. This is Individual Determinants of Health. Last week we talked briefly about health determinants, and I gave you these broad categories of environment, socioeconomic, and individual, that there are factors within each of these levels that influence our health outcomes, and we can also look at health care as a determinant of health, both the access to, the quality of care, and so forth. But that really covers all three levels as well, because we could look at the healthcare as a factor of the environment. Is there access to care? We could look at, so in the socioeconomic category, we could look at culture and how that affects our interaction with healthcare. And individual, we could even look at health behaviors around accessing care and things like that. So that's a broader category, but of course, we're going to look at that as well. Here's another diagram that kind of brings in all of those factors. The previous one is a rather simplified version just to help you get the main ones kind of placed in your mind. But this one expands it to a lot of other factors because in reality it is a very complex concept. And so here we have general socioeconomic, cultural, and environmental conditions on the outside, and that is comprised of all of these areas of agricultural and food production, education, work, living work conditions, unemployment, water and sanitation, healthcare services, and housing. And that really bridges both the general conditions as well as the social and community networks, because that all of those play into that closer area. And then on the inside of that, we have individual lifestyle factors, so things such as age, sex, and constitutional factors. Again, and there's always that argument of which is the most important. So in this research, this shows that the differences when people have tried to study which determinant really is the most important. And I raised that question last week. Looking at these three studies, just to give you an example, on the left, McGinnis in 2002 said healthcare really only influences up to 15% of a person's health outcome. Health behavior, so an individual determinant there, is 40%, and then the social circumstances and environmental exposure is at 45%. So we see this much bigger pressure given to, or weight given to individual behavior and then social circumstances. In the next one, in the Canadian Institute, we have healthcare influencing up to 25%. And then we don't see behavior studied, but we do see genetics, and then socioeconomic status on one side being 50%, and then environment itself pulled out of that exposure and given an additional 10%. And then Bunker in 1995, a very different one, said healthcare influenced up to 43% of a person's health outcomes, whereas other factors were 57%. So big difference in all three of these. We'll go through a few more. On this one, it's a little blurry, but again, we have social and economic factors still being fairly dominant, but we have all the other areas of genes and biology being 10%, the physical environment being 10%, clinical care 10%, and health behaviors being 30% here. So here we see all the different determinants we're going to be looking at, but you see the weight that they're giving them. Health behaviors all the way at 30%. This one, healthcare 10% again, so we kind of have this common theme that healthcare really is only 10% of the factors. Environment is much larger on this one, close to 20%. Biology, so our genetics, is at 20%. And then they say lifestyle is over 50%. So you can have your own opinion, obviously, because there's no agreement in research as far as the importance of each of these factors. Lifestyle, I believe, certainly is a factor, and that's what we're going to be focusing on in this module, individual factors, and what we're going to look at what all that encompasses. So the individual determinants of health that we're going to focus on are genetics, biology and health status, and behavior. So with genetics, obviously, within our genes, we're more susceptible to some diseases or others. Biology and health status looks at both your current physical health, your gender, your age, your biometrics essentially, and your current health status. So it's looking at all of these factors as determinants for your overall health outcomes. And then thirdly, we have behavior. And in behavior, we're going to break this up into 3 categories: risk behavior, prevention behavior, and illness behavior. Each of those are unique forms of behavior. They certainly do relate, but that can have effects on your health outcomes. The lecture is going to be fairly brief. I want you to interact a lot with the readings this week and look at the behaviors and the individual determinants that you're most interested in. So within behavior, the categories that are often looked at are risky sexual behavior, overeating, and so by overeating, obviously, not just how much we eat, but what we eat, and anything around nutrition overall, it can be a behavior pattern that we look at as a determinant of health. Smoking, alcohol abuse, the misuse of prescription drugs, illicit drugs, and inactivity is actually a behavior that is a determinant of health. We typically think of things like smoking as a behavior choice that is one of the biggest determinants of health that we like to focus on. You know, we have so many smoking cessation programs around the country. And when we look at data like this shows the past month cigarette use among persons age 12 or older by age as of 2012. So this is showing that nearly a third of people between the ages of 21 and 34 have used a cigarette within the past month. So this is clearly still an issue for our population. But let's look at some more unusual risk behaviors. What about inactivity? So I want to bring this one up just for some personal reflection as you think of your lifestyle within the field, whether you're a public health professional, a health professional. If you're on the clinical side, hopefully you're getting a lot more activity. But inactivity is actually one of the largest killers or determinants of poor health outcomes in the U.S. And one of the factors that causes the most in health expenses. So let's look at this great infographic. If you haven't seen this before, it's worth some time going through. Because smoking is something we all know about. It's heavily advertised, and we understand, most U.S. adults understand the risks of smoking to some degree, but do we really understand the risks of sitting all day long or being inactive overall and as a lifestyle? We're not talking about exercise here, but overall just lifestyle and inactivity. So on average, this infographic shows that we spend 9.3 hours a day sitting or being sedentary. And the claim is our bodies weren't built for that. So if you're listening to this lecture and you're sitting, I'd encourage you, go ahead and stand up. Stand up for a few minutes, do a few squats, do some lunges, do whatever you can while you're sitting there. This is an online class, so take advantage of that. Even if you're in class, I would go ahead and stand up or ask the professor if you think it might be awkward. But as an online class, you have the option to be doing your workout routine while you listen to the media. So this shows that sitting increases risk of death up to 40%. So 6 or more hours a day is what they're talking about. So you're 40% likelier to die within 15 years than someone who sits less than 3, even if you exercise. So they controlled for activity they controlled for exercise, and exercise, even then, you still had a 40% increased risk. So they have a sedentary lifestyle, which is 9.3 hours per day sitting, and then a low intensity physical activity lifestyle, and then a medium vigorous physical activity. So sitting is having this effect. Let's look at how it's doing that, what actually happens in our body and what's going on. So on average, obese people sit for 2.5 more hours per day than thin people. So there is a correlation between sedentary lifestyle and our BMI. We're at a point now where 1 in 3 Americans is obese. Between 1980 and 2000, let's look at what happened. Exercise rates stayed the same. So self-reported exercise of how many hours or minutes or whatever the current reporting system was at the time, they stayed the same, but sitting time increased 8%. So we were spending more time sitting, and in that, obesity doubled. Obviously, sitting isn't the only thing that was happening that may have changed during those 20 years, but there was a significant correlation. Now, sitting doesn't expend much energy. So if you look at the chart below, compared to sitting, you have already a 10% energy increase if you just simply stand. You have a bit more if you're chewing gum, but then walking has 150% energy increase, and then climbing stairs, you're at, 220 there. Standing up, moving around greatly increases your energy output. But unfortunately, even if you do some walking or stair climbing in the day, your body kind of shuts down once you start sitting. So even if you spend an hour exercising a day and then you spend 8 hours sitting, you're still going to feel the effects of a sedentary lifestyle. So this shows as soon as you sit, the electrical activity in your leg muscles shut off. Your calorie burning drops to 1 per minute, and enzymes that help break down fat drops to 90%. So that's as soon as your body is in a sitting position. After 2 hours of sitting, if you haven't gotten up, your good cholesterol drops 20%. And then after 24 hours, insulin effectiveness drops 24% and risk of diabetes rises. So this shows people with sitting jobs have twice the rate of cardiovascular disease as people with standing jobs. It's a big difference. So how to get out of your chair and stay alive. So for us who have to sit 8 hours a day or more, how do we be active throughout that? So 30 minutes per day is the current recommended amount of exercise, or 150 minutes per week. Instead of doing that all at once, if you walk throughout the day, you can offset those numbers. You can turn back the clock on all of these indicators here that you can get your electrical activity back up. You can get your good cholesterol back up. You can help your body stay in an active mode all throughout the day. So stretching, walking, and marching in place, jumping jacks, these are all things that will get your body back in an active mode even while you're sitting. So those who sit 3 or more hours per day watching TV are 64% more likely to die from heart disease. So your couch time, your entertainment time matters. So of those who sit in front of the TV 3 hours per day, those who exercise are just as fat as those who don't. So television watching had a direct link to increased risk of health risk, regardless of exercise. So each hour of watching TV is 11% higher risk of death. So even if you want to watch TV, get up and do something while you do it. When you're sitting, you know that at the end of the day, a lot of times we can feel tired, and part of that has to do with the ergonomics at our desk or wherever we're sitting. So 135 degrees, if at all you can get your chair in that position, that'll decrease back strain, and you'll actually feel like more activity throughout the day. So don't hunch. Okay, so this was put out by medicalbillingandcoding.org. You can find the information there. And I put that out there just because it kind of hits at home as far as when we're talking about health behavior and how hard it is to change health behavior. So hopefully that is something beneficial for you and not just, the clients and populations you're eventually serving. Within behavior, we also have prevention behavior. So in this, that's the opposite of what we were just talking about. So exercise, overall physical activity throughout the day, a balanced diet, and then screenings and checkups. These are all things that we would term preventive behavior. Now, when we break the other categories for behavior, we also have illness behavior. So this is our response to symptoms. So how do we interpret the symptoms as they appear in our body? Then treatment seeking. Do we go seek treatment? And then adherence to medical advice or health programs. So illness behavior is another category. So we have risk behavior, prevention behavior, and illness behavior as 3 subcategories within behavior, personal choices, lifestyle, things like that. So that's just a brief introduction to the terms. I hope you get some good enjoyment out of the discussions. What the questions I want you to reflect on this week are, first, specifically on the HBO documentary Weight of the Nation. I'm only asking you to watch the first, I think it's like 22 minutes or so. You could please watch the whole thing if you have time. But in the first bit, as they introduce the topic, how are the determinants of health discussed? Individual, social, environmental, and healthcare. I want you to talk about what you learned and what you want to know more about. Second, I want you to reflect on the TED Talk. I'll have you watch it and see, but I want to know, Did the results surprise you, and what are the implications for public health in America as we talk about lifestyle behavior recommendations, specifically around exercise, fitness? Third, you have a list of potential articles to select from. I want you to choose 2 articles at least from that group and then reflect on them. So identify each of the articles, and for each one separately, talk about what individual determinants were addressed in the articles and what you learned. So those are 3 things I'm asking everyone to talk about. I would recommend that you also talk about the 4th option, but it is optional if you don't feel comfortable with this one. But I want you to reflect on behavior as a determinant of health in your own life. Are there behaviors you've changed at some point? How did that happen? What else would you like to change? In the articles, specifically in the HBO documentary, you're around physical activity and nutrition, you're hearing about some major lifestyle changes. There's a number of individual determinants that are possible, and if you have one that you have changed, share that with the class. Let us know how that went if you're up for doing that. But then maybe you've never made any conscious decisions to really change lifestyle issues as far as how it relates to your health. What would you like to change? How would you go about it? So that would be, I think, a really interesting discussion for us to have. Overall, some comments on the discussion board. Thank you. You all have engaged intensely, and I appreciate that. It looks like some good discussions going on. Some guidelines that people are wondering, like, am I writing enough? Am I writing too much? I would say if you're typing up your discussion ahead of time using standard 12-point font, Times New Roman, it should fit on about a page. If you're 2 or 3 pages, you're probably too lengthy. I appreciate it, but you don't need to go to that length. And if you're like, say, 1 paragraph or a fraction of a page, it may be a little skimpy, so beef it up a little bit. Another comment is I've opened a poll for you to indicate your time zone. I'd really like to do some group projects throughout the quarter, and it helps if you work with people at least in your same time zone, I know, for scheduling. So if you could do that even before Thursday night, if you could do that earlier on this week, that would really help. If you have any questions, and also feel free, especially these next few weeks as we look at each of the determinants, if you would like to research an additional topic of health determinants instead of maybe one of the selected articles that I've provided for you, that is fine. I would love for you to do some research on your own into things that interest you. So you can do that. If you don't see a topic you're interested in what's provided, just make sure, like for this week, that it relates to individual determinants and health disparities. So whether that's genetics or health status, biology, or behavior, whether it's risk behavior, prevention behavior, or illness behavior. Any of those topics would be great, and I'd love to have that added to the discussion board. So with that, I hope this week is interesting for you. I look forward to seeing your comments. Thanks.